We're very privileged today to also have with us Dr. Barbara Reynolds, and she is a member of the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent. Please help me make Dr. Barbara Reynolds welcome at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry I missed day 1 and 2, but I did have graduation weekend at my university yesterday, and I did need to be at commencement yesterday. Following you is going to be a little bit difficult, but I'm going to try. Let me say, first of all, that, and I've said this bilaterally, but I want to say how enthused I am personally, and we as a working group are, about our collaboration with WCC and the people at WCC, because not only are they on the right track, but they're moving forward. I want to begin with 3 kind of quotations. The first is Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of us? And sometimes I say, oh woman, oh man, oh girl, oh boy. That we do justice, we love mercy, and we walk humbly with our God. I want to suspect, as happens in these kinds of chemical or sometimes they're arithmetic sayings, if we fail in one part, we fail in all 3 parts. So it's not just about justice, it's not just about mercy, but it's a bit of humility also. The second quotation I wanted to share with you, and I usually get it wrong, so I had to screenshot it. You know, I have a little tag that, you know, the grant me the serenity prayer. Angela Davis says, I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. And in 2025, we have to be there. It's been a long time. The third one, I don't have a good reference for it, but the more I think about it after I heard it, the more it resonates with me. And it's simply that the heart is more inclined to the left. And I'm just leave that there. One of the unintended outcomes of the transatlantic slave trade, I do believe, is the deconstruction of the Black family, the Black identity, the Black individuality, but also the Black community. And when I say the Black community, I just don't mean the village or the town or the nation, but how Black people come together, the solidarity, if you will. Now, the reason I say it was an unintended outcome is because history teaches me that Columbus, when he wandered over and lost his way, it was about aggrandizement. It was about greed. It was about resources. They weren't really interested in whether Black people were together or not together. But the unintended outcome that we see lingering today is the deconstruction of who Black people really, really are at their essence. And the fact that, as a matter of law, in the US, and we tend to quote the US a lot, not because of its preeminence, but because there's data about the US, and we have CNN and MSNBC and Fox News. You choose which poison you wish. Is that, as a matter of law, a poor family cannot get public assistance in the US unless they can prove that the woman is on her own with the children, and we exclude the male. Now, let's work back from that and try to figure out what has happened to the Black masculinity the Black femininity, the Black identity, the Black family, and the Black community. And it seems to me that one of the intended outcomes of our work of doing justice, loving mercy, and walking humbly with our God has to be about a reconstruction of the Black identity, of the Black masculinity and the Black femininity, and the Black identity and community as individuals and as a collective. This is of critical importance because we are inundated with all the memes and all the stories about who we are as people. And I'm scared witless of being considered the angry Black woman. And so I tamp down my anger when everybody else could express their anger. And I've trained myself to do that. Is it good for me? Probably in the 21st century. But it does have an impact. And in the working group, we've been talking about Black stress and how we see everything through the lens and the impact that has on us. I have 5 caveats today. I'm going to go ahead and share them as I always do. First of all, people of African descent, Black people, are neither monochromatic or monolithic. We come in many shapes and sizes and colors and hair textures. And I say that jokingly, but what I mean is we've got diverse political views, economic views, views about, whether broccoli is good for us or not. We're not monochromatic nor monolithic. Why do I say that? Because it is very easy for someone to say to us, but that Black person over there doesn't do it the way you do. I did not attend my matriculation ceremony at one university, not because I didn't want to, or not because I didn't want not to, but I didn't do it that somebody else will say to some young student coming after me, that person did it. And that's how we live, with a lot of stress. I don't know about you. You get on the plane and you're counting heads. Okay? And when you hear the news, you're saying, oh, Lord, I hope it's not a Black person did that one. That's the Black stress. The second caveat is that as a human rights person and as a human rights professional, we're all aligned with the principles of all rights, all people, all the time. The reason we're talking about Black people today is that we're a conference about anti-Black racism. But I can assure you that if you take all of us in here and put us in the indigenous space tomorrow, or put us in whatever disability space tomorrow, because we're human rights professionals, we'll be talking the same language. All we would have done is change the data. And that's important for us to tell people, because often people feel that if we talk about anti-Black racism, we're anti whatever is the opposite of Black. And I'm so confused, I don't even know what's the opposite of Black anymore. The third caveat is that we recognize and appreciate that there are other races who have always walked alongside of us. And that is to be respected. And that's why we as Black people walk alongside not just other races, but other peoples and people in different disadvantaged circumstances. Whether they're indigenous peoples or whether it's name any country in the world, we stand in solidarity with them. That's why, for example, the working group will always sign on to statements about other groups, regardless of what they are, because injustice for one person is injustice for all. The fourth caveat, I think, is that it's absolutely essential that we accept that in the 21st century, in 2025, racism is not a Black and white matter. Now, I say so conceptually, obviously, there are gray areas. But I want to highlight the fact that the racism that we face in the 21st century is not against white people only. There are other peoples who seek just as assertively or aggressively as white people did through the slave trade and through colonialism to oppress and exploit black people. I need not say what color they are because I don't know what color they are, but they're there. And that's why, as a corollary to that, I say, if you're oppressing your people at home, please don't go to London and talk about on BBC about reparations for black people. It just doesn't work. My last caveat, my black brothers and sisters, there's a whole lot of schisms among us. We have to deal with those schisms and the healing within before we can move forward. And that brings me back to the unintended negative outcome of slavery and colonialism, the deconstruction of who we are, our identity as individuals and as a collective. You go to the US, you have Afro-Caribbean people, African Americans, you got people saying they're not African, but they're American. You got people saying that only people who came on which ship should get reparations and not if it's overwhelming. Unless we can come to terms with the schisms among ourselves, there is no way forward. And so there's some healing that we have to do. And the issue is our hands are full. We've got to walk in parallel lines. We can't do one and then do the other. This plane, we have to fix it while we fly it. And since I'm in a congregation of believers, and hope to God that we land safely. So let me come to the church, the church. One of the things that I've been trying to highlight for the last few years as we tilt our focus toward reparatory justice is that basically there were three axes on which slavery, colonialism, segregation as all its forms rested. And one of those was obviously the states, the powers of be at that time, hence being in Berlin 140 years later. Spain, France, Britain, Belgium, and in the 21st century, you can name all the countries that are still exploiting Africa or still trying to oppress black people. The second was the commercial houses, the precursors to Lloyd's of London and the insurance companies, who thought that they would insure the owners of black people for the loss of their property, aka black people. The third was the church. And in my mind, that was the most heinous of them all because it was the church that blessed the perfidy of these states. It was the church that helped them to understand that what they were doing was not just acceptable, but morally right. And coming to the 21st century, here's the work that you have to do because you're the theologians. I am just an advocate. The world is confused by the church. There is confusion about whether in the Bible, when the good book talks about slaves obeying their masters, if God really meant the slave trade. Did he? Well, you got to tell people that. I can't. I don't have any authority. It is the same Bible that was used to oppress and vilify and disdain that you have to use to help people to better understand, to reshape the narrative and the interpretation of what the good book says that will help us to get to the kingdom, metaphorically speaking. From this confusion has to come a coherent narrative where everyone can see himself or herself. Who is wrong and who is the wronged? And why is it that we look to people who rightfully say, I didn't do you anything, my forefathers did? How do we help people to better understand that if you're benefiting from the cumulative privilege, then it follows ipso facto that others are benefiting from the cumulative disadvantage? And how do we help people to move from this confusion of the words in the Bible that are interpreted any way we wish to a coherent narrative, and from that coherent narrative to acts of collaboration and cooperation? As the professor pointed out, those who perpetuated these horrific crimes are as much harmed by those against whom these horrific harms were perpetrated. You know, it's funny. One of the things I learned when you're very, very rich is that you don't sleep that nicely. You live in houses that have lots of bars, 3 alarm systems. Some people actually sleep with guns under their pillows, and I'm worried that that gun will go off and I don't know, it's going to be all over. When you're poor, you just sleep. And you know where I learned this? I learned this when I spent 5 years in Nigeria. And that was my first encounter in living in a place where I needed to have a guard or guards, because I lived in a little compound. And I was curious about why ignorance is not bliss. I was curious about why everywhere in these uber rich neighborhoods, there was so much poverty, but on the roadway. Until it dawned on me, those are the people who clean the houses. That's where they eat. That's where they sleep. That's where they live. And the rich and the poor live in an uncomfortable symbiosis. But I digress. I just wanted to make the point that it is absolutely critical that we move from confusion to coherence, and through coherence to collaboration. The idea behind anti-racism is not to flip it and for blacks to be black supremacists. That is not the antidote. It's for people to be able to live comfortably with one another. And we haven't been able to put forward that narrative. I mean, if we take a simple narrative about pro-choice and pro-life, I mean, choice is not the opposite of life, and somehow we let that narrative get away from us. Pro-choice cannot be the opposite of pro-life. Choice and life, they're like two different universes. Logically, it's going to be pro-life or anti-life. And if you examine it, you'll see it's true, because the same people... Let me not go there today. I forgot where I am. So we come back to what I call religious autocracies, the church, the arrogance of the church, the perfidy of the church, the fact that the church was complicit, turned its back on what was wrong, and allowed both the commercial houses and member states. The fact that it was the church that prayed over these things, the fact that it is the church that ensured that slavery survived, means that the church not only has to atone for historic wrongs, but the church has to be proactive in ensuring that these harms are reversed. And it leads us, therefore, to a couple of things about the church. And here I hope you as theologians would help us as lay people understand. What then is the lens through which we look at the politics of the church? And I use the church not as denomination. I use the church as a pseudonym for all. It's fascinating to be alive in 2025, but it's as scary as ever. To see an American Pope who they say has some black in him. Now, I don't believe that dead people are alive, but if they were alive, there are lots of people turning in their grave today because they don't understand what on earth is happening in the 21st century. But let's make no mistake, that is not by accident. And we can only live to see how that plays out in politics in real time. So that's the first lens. The church as a civil institution. How is it that the church is working to ensure that there is proper reformulation of legislation and laws if the church hasn't fixed its own liturgy and its own internal laws? Because it's in that civil space where we set the blueprint for what comes after. It's the legislation, it's the policies, it's the procedures, it's the way budgets are formulated and played out. And please don't tell me about corruption. Every morning I have a lesson on corruption. Because any fruit that you can pick whatever you buy in the market, by the time you're ready to cut it up by Tuesday, that's corruption. It's sin. So I stopped talking about human beings who are corrupt. That's the Lord's gonna fix that one. The civil space. The role of the church in the economics of humanity. And how is it that the church is gonna flip this script where poverty is not just endemic in certain groups and certain races and certain peoples, but it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm a firm believer that until Black people, people of African descent, achieve economic viability and independence, we ain't going nowhere. There's no poor people party. It is futile to send a proposal to NORAD and SEED and all of that for money to have a conference to talk about Canada and the US. It's a contradiction in terms. That's why I'm so grateful for Zoom. Use it for 59 minutes, start over if you can, buy subscription and talk our way through these. But you understand where I'm going. I mean, in some countries, they can't even ask for civil unrest. And I place the emphasis on civil. Who's gonna strike when they're so poor? The first week, yes, everybody's gonna be enthusiastic. We'll strike. The second week, you have your kids. You have your mortgage. Okay, we're gonna try another week. But after a while, people will drop out. The strike relief we had in the 50s and the 60s came from a 3-letter institution that wasn't really interested in our independence. They were interested in who governed our newly independent countries. And between then and now, I think the number count is that there have been 25 or 27 assassinations of Black leaders in Africa. Think about that. From the 50s to now, people like Sankara, Lumumba. The role of the church in the social space. Now, as an educator myself, I know that education plays one of two diametrically opposed roles. It either maintains the status quo or it disrupts it. It can't do both. But one of the things that I'm concerned about is that our education right now is not really leading to employability of Black people. Without employability, there's no employment, including self-employment. And without that, there's no economic development that would lead to economic viability, that would lead to economic independence. We are not going to survive without that. What is the role of the church in education? Now, I've been to more schools than I can think about. And when I walk into school, right away, I know what's going to happen. In my country, if you drive along the road, you'll know which is a black village and which is another village, just from the main road. You'll see whether the building is repaired, and if the building is repaired, you could imagine what the classrooms are like and who the teachers there are. 2 years ago, when the working group was doing its report on economic viability of people of African descent, I went to WIPO, I looked on the website, and I looked for the percentage of black people who have patents. Please look it up. And we don't need anybody to give us a Black History Month. For the love of heaven, we live our lives 24/7, 365 days a year. This Black History Month is not for us. It's for other people. And therefore, we shouldn't be asking for Black History Month for ourselves. We should be using Black History Month to help people understand that fundamentally we're human. And finally, what is the role of the church in the cultural space? How has the church helped or not helped to shape our cultural identity? Let me close with a couple of things. So we just finished the first decade for people of African descent. Well, I've spoken so much about that. It had 3 pillars: recognition, development, and justice. On the recognition pillar, it was painfully obvious that there was much to be done. So I look at recognition in 4 ways: voice, visibility, views, and the vote. And I'm deeply concerned that in the 21st century, we're still talking about the right to vote. And on the question of voice and visibility, it is astounding to acknowledge that there are 2 million Black people in Mexico, for example. There are Black people in Argentina. There are Black people in every country in South America. But if you look at the delegation from these countries to the UN, you would not really understand that. You would not understand, for example, that Guerrero, a Black soldier, was one of the architects of Mexico's independence, because his statue is buried somewhere in Guerrero and not in Mexico City. So this question of voice and visibility is critical, not in a superficial or platitudinous way, because that's performative, but are we really visible? Now, there's a little thing that says nigga sing, nigga dance, nigga jump, nigga die. And what it really meant was that the spaces open to Black people were in dance and song and sports. It's fine. All of us appreciate that. But if it was nigga sing, nigga dance, nigga jump, and then nigga die, it means that we're not engineers. We're not neurosurgeons. We're not oceanographers. We're not even nurses and doctors. And so the role of the church in addressing this juncture, if you will, is critical. Health. I talk a lot about slave food, which I love. Y'all Caribbean people know we're eating salt, sugar, and fat every day. Salt, fish, salt, beef, salt, pork. We can't eat anything without a bit of salt, anything. What was the salt? The salt was in a barrel because we were eating spoiled food, And the salt was supposed to keep that thing cured for 6 months. Imagine eating beef that was sitting in salt for a whole year in a barrel, or cheese that's so salt that it begins to calcify and we love it because that's what we knew. The thing is calcifying in our own hands. That was slave food. And if it wasn't salt, it was sugar. And you look at the sugar we consume, everything is laced with sugar. So much so that our taste buds are having difficulty adjusting to natural food. And if it wasn't that, it was fried until it was unrecognizable. Now, when we look at non-communicable disease among Black people, we're riddled with hypertension, diabetes, high everything except it's slave food. And the legacy of that is here. And who's reversing that? Now, this is not a joke. You check it out. You go to supermarkets in peri-urban areas in the US and everywhere else, and you go to supermarkets in areas where rich people live, and just go to the produce section, you see the difference. Rotting vegetables in one and fresh, luscious vegetables in another. And we could afford to buy brand name hamburgers, and I love them, but I try to limit them to once or twice a year, right? You know, the hamburger with the milkshake and the cheese, like heart attack on top of heart attack. But it's important to understand that that is financially affordable. Whereas poor people don't have the wherewithal to buy fresh vegetables and cook decent food. And by decent, I don't mean fancy food, I mean healthy food. And so the cultural patterns, where is the church? How is it that the church, now the last data I checked, there are 280 something Catholics in Africa. How is it that the church allowed a continent that was feeding itself until enslavement on maize and nuts and all kinds of things, that there's famine now that's cyclical, and people are importing wheat when they're growing maize? Come on, our minds are messed up. We need to fix that. That's what I talk about, identity. How is it that we haven't figured all of this out? So, the second was justice. Well, we don't need to talk about justice. May 25 is George Floyd Day, coincidentally. It's Africa Day. I don't know what was going on about that. Every country where the working group has gone for a country visit, we see injustice more than we see justice. We see the overrepresentation of Black males in prisons. And a couple years ago, I went on a country visit, and my colleagues couldn't understand why I was so angry. And I don't think I've been able to explain it. So we go on this country visit, and they took us to see a prison that they were building. And I'm like, why are you taking us to see a prison you're building and showing us how wonderful it's going to be? We're a working group of people of African descent. What is it that you're telling us that you think we can't understand? Take us to school. Take us to a clinic. Take us to a playground. Why are you taking us to a prison? I'm still angry, and I couldn't express my anger. Because, you know, this myth of the angry Black woman. You go on a country visit and people take you to see a prison, what they're telling you, we're preparing to capture your young men and put them in here. That's why we're building it. And let me say that that is a direct consequence of colonialism, because the police force in our countries were patterned after forces that were put out there to capture runaway slaves. We haven't changed the legislation. And that's why I say it's not just a black and white thing. There's some governments that they're just clones. They've cloned everything that they met. They're shells. They didn't change anything. The third one was development. Well, we need not say more about development because, as Prof said, this question of class and color confuses our eyes and gender. So I have two other things to say and I'll sit down. Yesterday at graduation, the president pointed out that only 12% of the graduates were males. Actually, he said 88% of the graduates were females, and everybody was cheering. I'm like, that's not a good thing. I'm not cheering. In the Caribbean, you know, in southern Nigeria, in southern Africa, you know, we know, that young women have been going to school at ever increasing percentages, and our young men are not going to school. Ladies and gentlemen, Black people, wake up. This is not a good thing. Don't let anybody fool you. I'm a mother. I'm supposedly a grandmother. I'm a sister. I'm a daughter. I'm an auntie. Even the guards call me mommy. We cannot sit here and be comfortable that in my country, the university, the ratio is 60 to 40. And at the teacher training institution, the ratio is 85 to 15. And at my own university, where I now work, where I did my undergraduate work, it's 88 to 12. It is not right. And those are the things that we allow to mask where we ought to be. We can't have just 12, 15, 20, 30% of our boys going to school. It's not just a question of whom will the girls marry. They'll go out and marry white men, Chinese men, Indian men. That's not the issue. That's not the issue. The issue is, are we wasting our potential? And that if from a graduating class, do the average, let's say 30% of the graduating class alone, to do the average across the globe, is male, we're making room for them to go to prison. That same prison that they're building is for them. Where's the church? How is it that church people sit and look down at congregations that are almost universally female in our part of the world and be happy when the clergy is male? What is it about our psyche that will help us to be comfortable preaching to congregations that are increasingly female? How are we shaping the church so that it is representative of hip young men who have attention spans of whatever, or who are only interested in technology? Or is it that the curtains are too red and too green and has too many flowers and we need to get rid of the curtains so that men are happy to be in church? I don't know what it is. But the bottom line that I'm saying, I can no longer accept things that I need to change. And while we don't have the answer for everything, we do need to move, and you do need to lead us from this theological confusion to theological coherence, to collaboration with the laity, collaboration among the races, among the classes. And yes, even in Guyana, even in Jamaica, we got classes. All of us poor, but we think we have classes. Among the diversity of who we are, I truly do believe that the Bible has an answer for every question, everything that flummoxes us. And one of my favorite texts is, of course, Micah 6:8. I do believe that if we can find a way to do justice, but to tilt slightly to the left, not the crazy stuff. We're all awake, we're all alert. Prof, I thoroughly believe in the awakening. I'm woke. I'm awake. The Bible says we should be alert. And if you look at woke, it comes from black music about 70 years ago, right? I do believe that if we can love mercy, and perhaps if we can do what we have to do with a degree of humility, accepting that we're different but equal, accepting that even among the poor, some are going to tilt politically to the right and to the left. That's okay. And accepting that some will have different views about gender and sexuality and, you know, what color is acceptable, or even whether Black people should braid their hair or wear weaves or whatever. I do believe that if we could get to that point, that the issue of racial justice and reparatory justice and environmental justice and digital justice is very much in the grasp of our hands. If we could put a man on the moon, we could achieve that. Thank you very much.